Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the OVS VOCA application webinar. My name is Chet Fisk. I will be one of the moderators for today's webinar. Before we get into the questions that were submitted in advance, I would like to make a few suggestions or reminders that pertain to the application process. Please make sure to print out and read the entire RFA. After you read the RFA, I would suggest that you read it again, then ask a colleague to read it, asking them to look at it as well to make sure that you're not missing anything. We don't want anybody to not see something that's there that's going to affect their application. Secondly, please make sure you read the VOCA rules and regulations that have links to them in the RFA. These rules and regulations are what we can and cannot do. They provide a lot of information, so we're going to recommend that you please make sure that you do read them. Next, I would say please make sure that you leave yourself time to complete and submit the application in advance of the due date. We don't want anybody to be, closed out. Unfortunately, what happens every time, excuse me, that we have an application submission due, somebody waits to the last minute and it's an hour or two before. I don't know whether, it's an IT function or whatnot, but something happens and someone gets stuck and it doesn't get in. We have no control over this. We cannot make the grants gateway where the applications are submitted remain open to take your application. They are going to shut down at 2 o'clock. It's electronic. At that time, nothing else is going to be able to come through. So I would seriously recommend that, even put your due date in your head 3 days before. Make sure that you are saying to yourself, I have to have this done ahead of time. So there is no way that you are actually going to get closed out of the application when it's due. Prequalification. This is one of the most important parts of getting this application submitted into the gateway. You must be pre-qualified on the date that your application is submitted. Excuse me. That means that if you submit your application 2 weeks before and something has happened in the 2 weeks between the time that you submit it and the due date, and for whatever reason your document vault in the grants gateway reopens or expires, you're not pre-qualified. You need to check and double check to make sure that you are actually pre-qualified when you're submitting your application, and that you are also going to be pre-qualified at the date of application due date, which is April 3rd. Again, if you submitted it 2 weeks before, something happened and that reopens, we don't know anything about that, and there's really nothing we can do. You're not going to be eligible. It has to be saved. It has to be submitted. We've actually had situations where people have gone in and uploaded everything and they've saved it and inadvertently didn't push that submit button. The submit button needs to be, you must submit the application for the process to be completed. So what I would like to say is, at a minimum, strive to have everything uploaded and submitted in the grants gateway at a minimum a day before it's due, preferably 2 days, because we really have no control over the late applications. There's really not a lot we can do about that. So a few things about today's webinar. First of all, this is being recorded, so it will be available out on the OVS website. What we're going to do is we're going to start answering questions that were submitted in advance of the webinar. As we stated, we wanted people to submit questions in advance if they could, and we did get quite a few. We have quite a few questions that were submitted ahead of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to start answering those questions. We are scheduled for 90 minutes. It's a good possibility we will not get through all those questions. There were quite a few submitted. And questions that you may be submitting today as well. If we are not able to answer all the questions that are submitted today, they will be answered in writing when we answer. The due date is February 7th. So after today, you have until February 7th to submit any question. If there's a question that's been submitted already or one that gets submitted today, if we do not get an opportunity to reply to it today, it will be answered when we reply to all questions that are submitted. The due date for OVS to respond to all your questions is February 20th. We will endeavor to get that ahead of time if possible, but at the latest on February 20th, we will have all the answers to every question. So like I said, depending on the questions, we may not be able to answer them all during today's webinar, It could be that there's actually a question that was submitted that we don't have the answer to right now, and we're looking for information on that. And if that's the case, we will, again, answer that in our written responses. Please remember, you have until the 7th. So if there's something that you hear today that evokes another question, or if we don't get to it, or something you think of, you have up until the 7th to get anything into us by close of, I believe it's 2 o'clock on the 7th. And anything that you get into us, we will have answers back to you by the 20th. We have several staff members here today that are going to be able to field questions. So if you hear radio silence on this end, you may hear some silence because, you know, we're going to be muting our line while we are in discussions here. Now, everyone is welcome to use the chat feature to submit their questions. We are going to do our best to answer them all, but as I said, we may not get to them today based on the time spent answering the ones that have already been submitted, and maybe the ones that have been submitted will answer your question anyway. So with that said, let's get on to the questions that were already submitted. Question 1, the directions for submission tell us to input a narrative directly into the project summary box on the grants gateway. Should that be for all sections, which would be the problem statement, proposed services, implementation, organizational capacity and evaluation, or should just the organizational capacity be put into the separate grants gateway field? The RFA states all 4 of these sections should be submitted together in one detailed narrative. That should be in the project summary section of the grants gateway. Question 2, are we able to purchase vehicles? Yes. Next, question 3, are we able to lease vehicles? Yes. You'll see that this was something that was not allowed before, but we are now allowing vehicles for purchase or lease. Question 4 is in reference to increasing the wraparound services that are provided to victims and survivors as a result of new OVS funding opportunities. We're now faced with a shortage of available offices. Can we include costs to build and construct new office spaces? The answer to that would be no. Capital costs are not VOCA allowable. Construction is not VOCA allowable. Question 5, as a child advocacy center, we work closely with members of our multidisciplinary team, and the question is, can funds from this grant be used to send members of the multidisciplinary team to training? The answer would be yes. Next question, is equipment that will support investigations involving victims that we serve allowable? Specifically, subject interview room cameras, polygraph equipment for law enforcement partner agencies. The answer to that would be no. Next question, can we use funds from this grant to purchase or lease fuel, insure, and maintain the vehicle for providing transportation assistance for victims? The answer would be yes. Can funds from this grant be used to purchase needed supplies for victims? Examples provided were clothing, food, school supplies, etc. Yes, but it must be on an emergency basis to address an immediate need of a crime victim. Next question, to what extent are public awareness presentations funded? Would this include programs such as Darkness to Light, Teen Child Safety Matters, etc.? Without knowing what those programs, entail, public awareness presentations are VOCA allowable if they are to identify and inform crime victims of their specific rights and services available, and to provide them with or refer them to services or assistance. Can funds from this grant be used to finance multidisciplinary team wellness? For example, providing on-site chair massages, yoga, or other fitness programs? The answer is no. Can funds from this grant be used to finance team building retreats for multidisciplinary team members? The answer would be no. Is one-on-one leadership coaching for managers or MDT coordinators allowable? The answer would be no. Would we be able to apply to fund 2 full-time nurses, sexual assault forensic examiners, to perform FREs and follow-up exams for our 4 hospitals in our healthcare system? Excuse me. They would work alongside the counseling and advocacy staff, as well as participate in multidisciplinary team meetings, SARTs, etc. So the answer is yes, and we would encourage applicants to read section 94.119 G and H of the VOCA rules as they craft their proposals, because it speaks to this there in that section. So yes, but again, the VOCA rules and regs, we provided links to them in the RFA. They are in the RFA, and that would be on page 4 of the RFA. Please confirm that if we're providing services in more than one VOCA funding priority, as with the previous RFA, that we should submit additional applications. For example, last time we submitted 3 funding proposals, all of which were granted, one for domestic violence, one for sexual assault, and one for underserved. They plan to do the same again. So we know that last time there was concern that we had some, programs that, wanted to submit one application, some wanted to submit more than one application. At this time, it's not necessary to submit more than one application. Your program can submit one application that includes the services provided for multiple VOCA funding priorities. That said, if you feel that for you it works better to submit more than one application, you can do that. So it's either or. You can submit one for all of them. You can submit separate ones. Keep in mind that for each application you submit, though, you will have a separate contract. So the idea behind allowing one application for all different priorities is to allow you to only have one contract to manage. Question 15, should we incorporate the case management services and associated costs which we received in a separate contract into this application? It would mean that a funded would have 3 separate contracts down from 6 separate contracts. So we can't advise what's best for your program, but should you choose to add the current case manager contract expenses into this RFA, and if you were awarded, you would need to terminate the case manager contract that you have now. Now, please keep in mind, OVS did not require a match component for the case manager contracts. So right now, you are not required to show a match for the case manager contracts. If you choose to cancel them, terminate those contracts, and add that into a new application that you could be funded for, there is going to be a match component on all that. So that's something you want to keep in mind. They are perfectly fine staying the way they are. We will address at some time in the future when it comes to the end of the case manager contracts how we're going to handle them. But right now, you don't have to match on them. If you do choose to terminate those contracts and add them into a new application, you're going to have to provide a match for all of them. So that would be up to you, your choice. The position description form, category definitions do not mention FTE caps in any categories. Does that mean there are no longer any caps for OVS admin or skills supervision required? And that is correct. There are no longer caps for OVS administrative or skills supervision required. But costs must correlate to the direct service component of the grant. So applications that include reasonable and justifiable administrative costs will be scored more favorably in the budget and budget narrative portion of the evaluation. We have, removed those caps, but again, everything must be justifiable in the narrative. Next question, in the RFA under section 5.31, MWBE requirements, it mentions attachment 3, but it's not being seen anywhere in the gateway or on the OVS website. If awarded a contract, attachment 3 may be required. It's not there, yes, you're right. But if you are awarded a contract, it may be required at that time. The question went further on to ask if there were any exemptions allowed. Usually personnel costs, friends, travel, postage were not excluded. MWBE requirements generally apply only to discretionary non-personal service costs. Regarding the match, if we have donors who would contribute funds towards program, can we use it as match, assuming the funds would go directly towards positions or VOCA allowable activities, and financial documentation was in order showing that the donation was directed toward the program? Yes, donor-funded positions used as match must be listed on the position description forms. Question 19. Will this RFA grant funds to pay for office furniture used in day-to-day operating functions to assist crime victims? Does the grantee have to pay per item match percentage? Yes, the RFA can pay for office furniture at a prorated share if applicable. The grantee does not have to pay per item and match. The match would be on the total, not per item. Next question, question 20. Will this RFA grant funds to pay for computers, cell phone, and service to use in direct assistance to crime victims while in the field? Does the grantee have to pay per item match percentage? The grant can pay for computers, cell phones, and service for grant match funded staff members at a prorated share, if applicable. Again, the grantee does not have to pay per item match. Match is based on the total. Question 21. As a prosecuting attorney office crime victim unit, they're exempted from one objective, which is providing assistance in completing a victim compensation application. Victim and or related persons are permitted access to information related to important dates in criminal proceedings to this office. The answer is no. 22. If we have a federally negotiated indirect rate, may we include direct costs at that rate in our requests? Is there any cap on indirect outside of that federally negotiated rate? Yes, you may include your indirect costs at your federally negotiated rate. There are no caps on the indirect costs outside of your federally negotiated rate. 23. Would services to provide forensic examinations to child victims of physical abuse be allowable under this program? And would forensic exams for child physical abuse be allowable activities under the RFA for CAC providers? VOCA funds cannot support medical costs from a victimization, except for forensic medical exams for sexual assault victims. Question 24 is a very long question. I believe it takes up one whole page. But the question is about the organizational capacity, and the organizational capacity in the grants gateway. The RFA states in 3.4 on pages 12 and 13, the applicants must submit one detailed narrative that contains all of the following information, and that's the project summary, the problem statement, the proposed services and implementation, the organizational capacity. Now, the grants gateway, under the work plan overview form, there is a field for the project summary, but it's a 50,000 character limit. And there is a field for organizational capacity with a 4,000 character limit. In the grants gateway, would OVS like the organizational capacity to appear in the one detailed narrative in the summary field, the project summary field, or in the organizational capacity field, or in both? The Victim Services RFA evaluation indicates organizational capacity. The response to evaluate these criteria may be found in the project summary portion of the work plan. So again, they're saying, does this mean that the OVS application evaluation evaluators are reviewing it only in the project summary field, or are they also reading, are they also going to read the organizational capacity? We're going to go back to, refer back to question 1 on this. The RFA states all 4 of these sections should be submitted together in one detailed narrative in the project summary. If you have more characters, if you've reached your character limit in your summary, you can put them into the grantee pre-submission upload section. Question 25. Should we limit our total narrative to 50,000 characters as per the field parameters, or do we allow or encourage separate uploads for longer narratives? Again, while it's not a requirement, a separate upload is allowable for longer narratives beyond the 50,000 character limit. So we don't encourage, it's up to you, but it's available to you. Question 26. We will input a line item budget narrative into the grants gateway fields as the form directs. In addition, should a budget narrative be included in the overall narrative input into the project summary field, and include that into the character limit, or does entering the budget narrative into the specified field suffice? You should submit a detailed budget narrative in the expenditure budget section of the gateway. That should be done for each budget category. It's not to be included in the project summary section. You should have that detailed budget narrative in the expenditure budget section for each budget category that you're using. Question 27, the application template available on the grants gateway seems to show application fields that are not on the actual live application within the work plan overview tab. And should we assume that this is an error in the template, since the information is covered in the performance management tool and narrative? Or should we expect to separately provide data on objectives performance measurements and tasks in the designated fields. So you'll provide a response for the one required objective and task that's listed in the work plan properties section. This will match the figure that you indicate in the performance measurement tool upload. The required objective and task is to provide assistance in completing a victim compensation application. Question 28, for organizations that have multiple contracts, can we combine them into this proposal to only have one contract, recognizing that all contracts are on different schedules and that it may result in a period without funding coverage? I am going to go back to question 14 that says it's not necessary to submit more than one application. You can submit more than one application if you want to. I would also refer to question 15 about the contract, or excuse me, the case manager contracts, in that if you do that, you will have to match on the case manager. So if it's a case manager contract that you were referencing in your question, you're going to need to match on that if you include it in this. So, you know, you can choose to leave it as it is, or you can have it terminated. But if we do terminate it, you're going to have to come up with match for it on here. Is there a dollar maximum to the request, assuming that applicants provide the required matching funds for whatever amounts requested? No, there's not a maximum. The requests do need to be justified. I think, as everyone knows, you know, our funding has increased, and we're trying to make that available to all victim assistance programs. But again, we're not just, you know, putting the money out there willy-nilly. There needs to be good justification for it. If it is justified and needed, we want to be able to get it out there. So no, there is not a maximum. But again, whatever you're asking for, please make sure you justify the need for that. Page 13 of the RFA indicates that funds may be used to support administrative costs, but applicants are encouraged to keep administrative costs to a minimum. And then RFA page 20 indicates applications that include reasonable and justifiable admin costs will be scored more favorably. I believe the question is, are applicants that have federally negotiated indirect cost rates allowed or encouraged to use that administrative rate in the budget to cover overhead without point penalties? Yes, federally negotiated indirect cost rates are allowable. There's no point penalties associated with them. Page 4 of the RFA indicates that since the issuance of the OVS last RFA, many costs that were previously unallowable are now allowable under VOCA. What are the main categories of this newly allowable expenses? We're going to refer you back to the VOCA final rule side-by-side document. On page 4, there's a link to that. For instance, I will just tell you vehicles were not allowable last time, they are now. There are other things. It's really impossible for us to sit here and just go through everything that's now allowable that then wasn't. There are some things that VOCA may have allowed that the state of New York chose not to for whatever reason. So please go back and look at the side-by-side link. If there are any other questions in addition to that, I would ask that you get specifics, submit another question to us with specifics so we can address that specific question. Page 4 of the RFA encourages both evidence-based practices and innovation. Is OVS looking for a balance between these two types of activities, or does it prefer an emphasis on one over the other for proposed use of funds in the contract or the grant? We don't encourage one over another. There's not a preference for one or the other. It was simply a statement that that's what is out there, and that's what we would like to see. But again, we don't encourage one, and we do not have a preference or emphasize one over the other. Question 33. In the attachment C1 form, where it requests the total number of individuals to receive services and number of times each service was provided during the reporting period, is OVS wanting applicants to supply numbers associated only with these requested OVS grant contract funds, or do you prefer numbers reflecting services provided through all of the applicant's funding sources combined? When you report numbers, number of services, the provided individuals who receive those services, those totals should only reflect funding from this grant, not any other grants or any other funding sources for that matter. Page 14 of the RFA So going back to question 33, we'd like to make it clear that when reporting the number of services provided to receive services, the totals would only reflect funding from this grant funds and the match funds for this grant. I didn't originally state match as well, but if you're using match funds as well, they would apply as well. Excuse me. So when reporting, page 14 of the RFA indicates the required match must be either 20% of the project total or 25% of the total grant funds. In the example further down the same page, it gives an example showing only one method of calculation. Is this because the two methods of calculation will always yield an identical result mathematically, or does one method yield a lower match requirement? The applicant may choose a lower. They both yield the same result. The difference is the requirement is 20%, but it comes out to be 25% of the total grant award. So using that formula will get you the same figure one way or the other. So, question 35, page 24 of the RFA indicates a heading allowable subrecipient administrative costs, and bulleted examples beneath the heading such as brochures, design, and maintenance of website and social media. Are applicants that need or choose to use grant contract funds for such purposes encouraged to categorize such expenses in designated direct cost budget categories, such as marketing or contractual services, with detailed adequate descriptions? Or does OVS expect all such costs, ranging from equipment and furniture to project evaluation and brochures to website maintenance? Do we want it to be simply listed and described in detail under one single allowable or subrecipient administrative cost heading in the budget and budget narrative? Each expense item should be listed individually under the appropriate category. Is the purchase of needed computers allowable under this grant? And if such computers enable staff to deliver its direct services with increased efficiency or efficacy, the answer is yes. Page 5 of the RFA indicates perhaps your program seeks to enhance services to underserved, marginalized, or oppressed populations, such as older adults, young men of color, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, or LGBTQ+ victims. This funding presents a unique opportunity to explore those options. If an applicant wished to use some of this funding to reach out to particular underserved populations to help assure equal access to programs, is that allowable, or would such targeted use of the funds violate any OVS principles of prioritizing and serving everyone, first come, first served, across a more general population that is equally for outreach or engagement? Targeting underserved populations is allowable. However, you are required to serve all victims of crime that request victim services from your organization. Next question, question 38, wants to know if they are correctly understanding that we are allowed a total of 50,000 characters within the work plan project summary box to answer all the various heading questions that are asked in the RFP. Again, I would see question 25 where we state that a separate upload is allowable for longer narratives beyond the 50,000 character limit. Page 13 states that VOCA funds can be used to cover costs of program evaluation. Is there a cap on costs to conduct program evaluation, and can we subcontract with an outside program evaluator consultant? The answer is yes, the subcontractor can be used, and there are no caps set for the project evaluation component. The costs allocated to this should, again, be reasonable and completely justified. I'm going to take a break for about 1 minute here.
So I'm Matt Corsell. I'm going to be subbing in now for Chet as he takes a break. We're on question 40, and on page 8 of the RFA, it says, please know that victim assistance programs who were awarded funding under OVS's recent attorney services RFA are not eligible to apply for funding for additional attorney services without substantial justification as to why the funding is being sought. On our previous OVS contracts, we had some positions and objectives related to providing legal services. In the Attorney Services RFA, we received funding to fill gaps in these services. Are we still allowed to include positions and objectives related to some of the original legal services which we were utilizing OVS funding for prior to applying for the Attorney Services RFA? And the answer to that is yes, this would be allowed, but it needs to be justified. Question 41. Are the costs of office space rental or mortgage in order to provide victim services considered allowable costs? And office space rental is allowable. However, mortgage costs are an unallowable expense. Space costs must be allocated using one of the methods on the budget worksheet / attachment B, which is one of the pre-submission uploads in the gateway. And you can refer to the VOCA side-by-side as Chet referenced earlier. And I would encourage everyone to really become familiar with that as well. Question 42 is on page 22 of the RFA. It states that this is a multiple award solicitation. Does this simply mean that that OVS will be making multiple awards throughout the state, or that each successful applicant will receive multiple awards? In the previous RFP, programs were able to submit more than one proposal. Is that the case now? If so, are there any restrictions? Are there any benefits to doing this? And is there a cap per provider? The answer is a multiple award solicitation means that multiple programs will be awarded. And unlike the previous RFP, when applicants needed to submit separate applications for each priority, under this solicitation, applicants may apply for funding for different priority categories under a single application. However, if an applicant wants to submit a different application for each funding priority, they're able to do so. There's no restrictions pertaining to the number of applicants you can submit, or applications you can submit. Keep in mind, though, as we mentioned earlier, that a contract will result from each successfully awarded application. Question 43. On page 24 of the RFA, the first bullet under allowable subrecipient administrative costs, what does organizational expenses include? This organizational expenses allows for costs necessary and essential to providing direct services such as prorated costs of rent, telephone service, transportation costs for victims to receive services, emergency transportation costs that enable a victim to participate in the criminal justice system, local travel expenses for service providers, and required minor building adaptations necessary to meet DOJ standards, implementing the Americans with Disabilities Act, and/or modifications that would improve the program's ability to provide services to victims. Question 44, please define de minimis rate and what it's used for. And if an applicant chooses to use the de minimis rate and fills out the necessary forms, is it precluded from also including line item administrative costs in its budget? So yes, if you're using the de minimis rate, then a program cannot charge administrative costs. The de minimis rate is used to capture indirect costs for programs that don't have a federally negotiated rate. So keep in mind, if you have a federally negotiated rate and you want to charge indirect costs, you must use your federally negotiated rate and not the de minimis form. The de minimis form is not required. Question 45, can you please provide additional information and clarity on the program evaluation and expectations on page 13? The answer, see sections 3.4 and 5.26 of the RFA for information on the program evaluation component. Question 46, are programs able to submit 2 applications for funding programs in 2 counties? Separate applications would provide better clarity administratively, including assigning match, leveraging county funding to support programs, etc. So we're going to refer back to question 14, the answer for question 14. So it's not necessary to submit more than 1 application. Your program can submit more than 1 that includes services provided for multiple VOCA funding priorities, but it's not required. It's really up to each program to do so. And again, it will result in more than one contract for each application. Question 47. We plan to use the value of our local police departments as match for time spent consulting with advocates for lethality assessments and other client safety issues. While we have developed extraordinary cooperative relationships, we are not sure that adding an additional documentation requirements to their role would be possible. Due to the fact that we have detailed information regarding police consultation, can we document and certify the match value? The answer is no, this is not VOCA allowable, and match funds are held to the same standards as grant funds. We see that skill supervision provided is limited to 10% of one FTE. This equates to 3.5 hours per week. For larger programs such as ours, coordinators supervise many staff. Is there any opportunity for an exception to this 10% limit based on the size of our program? So the answer to this is referencing question 16. And in question 16, we state that there are no longer caps for OVS administrative or skill supervision required categories, but costs must correlate to direct service, the direct service component of the grant. So there are no longer caps on those items. Question 49, is training of service providers or criminal justice personnel considered a direct service? Performing training is not allowable. However, staff receiving training is allowable and should be recorded as training. Question 50, are there any caps for administrative and supervision costs? Again, we'll reference you to answer 16, which speaks to no caps on supervision and administrative costs. But again, remember, this all must be justified even though there are no more, the caps have been removed. Question 51, what happens if a program is struggling with match requirements? The answer is that match is a VOCA requirement, therefore you must have enough match to support the amount of grant funds that you request. 52, can we include funding to subcontract for supervision for staff's clinical questions from a licensed clinical social worker? The answer is yes. 53, can we include funding for staff development? The answer to that is direct service trainings are allowable. 54, it's a four-pronged question, and it states that we have some questions regarding the program evaluation described on page 13 of the RFA. So the first part, if an agency does not have in-house evaluators at present, but does have staff able to gather and review case and client data on a regular basis and determine whether or not program is on track to meet PMT objectives, is this adequate for meeting the requirements? The second part, please explain what you are looking for in terms of an evaluation process and how much detail you need. Do you want a specific evaluation or approach model, or do you want a type of evaluation? How much detail do you want on those methodologies, or do you just want to know what data will be gathered? Third part, how much are we expected to know up front if we anticipate having staff trained in evaluation on board within the next year? Can we indicate that a more complete plan will be developed at that time? And the final piece, is the purpose of the evaluation more for accountability or for program improvement or development of best practice? So with all of that, we answered it in a single paragraph rather than piece by piece. Our answer is that program evaluations may take many forms. The deliverable should address the effectiveness of your program with the measurement of specific objectives and goals. OVS is not dictating which methodology should be used, and the frequency with which the program will report to OVS the analysis and corresponding conclusions of the analysis will be negotiated with successful applicants. 55. Can existing funds that support victim services that are not federal monies be used as match funds for the purposes of this grant? And yes, that is the answer. 56. On Grant Gateway, there is the space for regional council. Should we fill in our regional council or a regional coalition, or just put NA? and you should just put NA. If we have multiple office sites, how do we list them all since there are only 2 address lines in the grants gateway? Our answer is that you should put your administrative office location as your address. 58, if we serve more than one county, how do we list them when it only gives one choice in the grants gateway? So please select the county where the majority of services are provided, and then provide additional counties that you serve in your project narrative. 59. We see Native American is no longer a priority category. Should we list this population under others underserved on attachment 2? And yes, you should. 60. Will OVS be...
Sorry, I muted. You're on.
Okay. 60. Will OVS be requesting the waiver for MWBE requirement again for this round of funding? And our answer is that it has not been determined at this time. 61. Is training for forensic interviewers an allowable expense under this grant when the purpose is, for example, to improve the quality of services or support the provision of evidence-based practices? Answer, direct service training is an allowable expense under this grant. 62, is funding all or nothing? For example, if we submit an application for $600,000, could we be approved for a lower amount? Our answer is that funding is not all or nothing. 63, is there a limit to the number of applications from an agency if, for example, the agency is providing services to 2 different priority populations or providing 2 different services? So the answer to this is to see answer 14, again, where it's not necessary to submit more than one application. Your program can submit more than one, but again, keep in mind every application that is successful will result in a contract. 64. We are a New York City-based CBO that currently holds contracts for 2 OVS programs. Both are set to expire on 9/31/19. They were procured under 2 different RFPs in the past, one OVS VA, the other OVS Young Men of Color. Our contract manager said we should reapply for the Young Men of Color population under this RFP. May a single agency submit multiple applications under this current RFP solicitation? Again, it's the same answer we're going to reference under 14 about leaving it up to each program to decide if they want to submit an application for each funding priority. Question 65. Please clarify in the Grants Gateway system, the work plan overview form has 2 boxes where narrative can be entered, a project summary text box with a limit of 50,000 characters, and an organizational capacity text box with a limit of 4,000 characters. The instructions on page 12, 3.4 of the RFA, state that applicants should submit one detailed narrative in the project summary section. Does that mean that we cannot or should not put any narrative into the organizational capacity text box, even though one of the 4 narrative sections asked for is called organizational capacity? Our answer is that the narrative should be submitted in the project summary section. Question 66. The program information form has been uploaded by New York State with track change edits still in view. Will there be a final version of this form? The final version of this is on the OVS website, and it's under VOCA, Victim Assistance Program, in the RFA. Question 67, is an unpaid intern who receives college credit for their work in our organization considered volunteer? Yes. 68, is there a weekly or monthly hour requirement for volunteers, for example, 10 hours per week? No, there is no hour requirement for volunteers. 69, matching funds need to be secured at the time of contract start and execution. To put it another way, could matching funds be built into the budget of another grant that begins after the beginning of a victim assistance grant? So anticipated match funds will need to be reflected on your budget submission with the RFA, but they don't need to be secured at that time. Any changes to match would need to be reflected through a BAR, a budget amendment request. Question 70. If we are a current contract holder with OVS from the 2014 VOCA grant program, which is expiring at the end of this year, due to our growth in demand for services, we are interested in funding an additional position. We were wondering if we can request more money than was requested previously, and yes, you can. 71, on the bottom of page 23 of the RFA, it states, supervision of direct service providers allow for the payment of salaries and expenses of supervisory staff in a project. When the SAA determines that such staff are necessary and effectively facilitate the provision of direct services, how and when would the SAA determination be made regarding the need to fund supervisory staff? Is there a cap to the FTE position funded for supervision? Can supervisory duties also be shared and funded among two positions? The answer is that you would need to justify, or I'm sorry, you would request the number of supervisory staff that your organization deems necessary and justify accordingly. There's no cap and duties that can be shared if justified. So that is the conclusion of our, at least the slides that we have for the pre-submission questions.
So this is Chet, and we got a few more questions that we're going to start answering now. So the next question is, if we could explain how the administrative funding for the grant works. Administrative funding must either be via federally negotiated rate or de minimis rate. The next question was, is there a cap on the administrative positions? That's built into the grant, and there is no cap on administrative positions. But again, they must be justified. Another question was that if there is a lag in hiring employees to be funded under the grant, excuse me, if there's a lag in hiring employees to be funded under the grant, can the salary cost be shifted to the year 2 and operating costs like office space, renovations, computers, shifted into year 1? Firstly, I want to say renovations aren't allowed. We can't, that would be a capital expense. But money needs to be spent in the year that it was budgeted for. If there's a lag in hiring, you are able to move money within that year by doing a budget amendment request, but it's for the current year only. Again, keep in mind what's allowable, what's not allowable, and renovations, would not be an allowable expense. Next question, are there minimum or maximum amounts for the project awards? We've answered that before. There is no caps or limit on what you can apply for. Next question, if an agency is allowed to submit more than one proposal addressing different VOCA funding priorities, is there a maximum amount overall that one agency can request or receive through the solicitation? Again, the answer is no. There is not a maximum amount. Next question, do other state agencies submitting an application have any additional requirements, or are they exempt from any steps in the application process? OVS holds state agencies to the same application standards as other programs. So at this point in time, we're not doing anything different there. Next question. Page 24, contracts for professional services. Can the budget include the cost of a trainer to improve direct services for staff, such as a trainer to help staff to prepare a victim to testify in court, or how to interview perpetrators by victims, or only to pay for other professionals who provide direct services to crime? Court proceedings are not allowable. Question about the volunteer form. What information goes into the time used as a match column? Are you looking for the number of hours here or the percentage of time? It's anticipated hours. Attachment C1, the PMT form. Where should outreach or public awareness presentations be recorded on the PMT form? They don't. I would say we can work with you to get that information in there afterwards. hold on one second. Okay, we're gonna mute the sound for a second here so we can look at a few more of these questions.
Okay, so we have a question about, does the OVS RFA fund services for secondary victims? If so, what is the specific definition of secondary victims applicants of this RFA should utilize? Are they entitled to the same types of direct services as primary victims through this RFA? If not, what is unique about the direct services for them? So, the definitions in VOCA have changed about secondary and primary, and they've taken those words away. They no longer break those out. So if you see VOCA 94.102, that'll answer your question about how they define victim. Second question, are web-based and electronic public awareness and promotional activities funded? Yes, if the goal is to identify and provide services to victims. Keep in mind that these may be prorated if applicable. And so I'm going to mute it again so we can discuss some more questions.
So we have a few more questions. One that's come in is referencing the attachment C1, the OVS Performance Assessment Tool Work Plan. And it includes a numbered sequence of prompts or questions that appear to begin in mid-sequence. So it starts with prompt 6, and beginning row 6, proceeding to 7, then 8, rather than starting with prompt 1. So the question is, are they correct in understanding that prompts 1 through 5 have been deliberately omitted and that there are no numbered prompts beyond 8? They state that they do see prompts A1 through E11 in rows 17 to 125, and they can comfortably follow them in their ordinary sequence. The reason you're not seeing anything is that rows 1 through 5 are unknown. That deals with the demographics. You have not seen them yet, so there's no way for you to get those demographics in there. You know, The rest of the questions are looking for the anticipated services, not anticipated demographics. So that's why you can fill in what you anticipate serving, but the demographics would not be something that you would have an answer for. Another question. Can we explain the change in the core deliverables? The RFA requires providing assistance with completing OVS applications. At previous RFAs, they state combined both completing applications and providing information about applications. And the question is, why has this changed? It was changed to be consistent with the OVC rules. Another question, will contracts follow the 80-20 rule, meaning that all non-personal service will be capped at 20% of total funding? And again, the answer is no. All personal service and non-personal service, you can apply for it, just must be justified. Another question, wanting to know if flexible emergency direct cash assistance for clients is allowable under this funding. The examples they provide are short-term housing assistance, after crisis shelter, moving expenses related to victimization, et cetera. They want to know, and is there a cap in how much emergency flexible cash assistance can be included per client, per contract? There is no cap. Again, you would just need to justify why you want to keep X amount of dollars there for those reasons. Let's see. I believe I did these. We have, I'm going to mute the line right now so we can get some more questions. Okay, so I just want to remind everyone that if we don't get to every question on the webinar today, we will respond to every question that is being submitted. Right now, I am going to answer a question that was submitted on the Q&A, wanting to know, is it possible to stagger implementation of new services? The example provided is if we wanted to increase clinical therapy services or develop transitional housing services, but they don't yet have the capacity for that, but they have a plan to increase that capacity in the next couple of years. Can they create a plan where they expand services or positions in year 2 of the grant? And the answer is yes. I mean, again, that has to be justified, you know, what you're asking for and what you want to do. But by all means, certainly you can submit a plan for going forward to have those funds. I mean, you would just include that in the budget for the year that you're going to be expending those funds. So we also have a question on here stating that in 2014, when we did our last grant, there were quite a few questions under the program-specific questions link on the grant. Now they're saying there are not any program-specific questions for this grant, or are they missing them? When they look at the grant now, there are no questions in that section. What we endeavored to do was to make it easy for applicants. There is the one program-specific question that they have to answer about the applications. Everything else we expect to be included in your project summary and your narrative. So what we want from you is a narrative giving us all that information. We want, everything from A to Z in that program narrative, that project summary you're going to submit, giving us your problem statement, your needs, the implementation, the organizational capacity. All that should be included there. And that's why we have not listed all those questions separately in there. You just have that one mandatory question to answer. Another question, if we are over the 50,000 characters in the work plan, can we say see attached and upload the entire narrative as a separate document? Yeah, I think you could do that. We had stated earlier that we wanted you to put it into the project summary and then add anything additional into the upload. But yeah, that would be fine if you wanted to just say see attached and include the rest of it in the grantee uploads. Another question, can funds be used to cover the cost for construction to make a shelter accessible, wheelchair ramp, widened doors, ADA, accessible bathroom, showers, etc.? The answer is yes. VOCA does not allow for construction or capital improvements, and the exception to that is ADA requirements and disability. And I am going to mute this so we can get some more questions. So the next question, follow-up to question 62. If approved for a lesser grant amount than requested, will programs be able to make adjustments to work plans to account for what's feasible with the lower funding award? Yes. That's obviously going to be a possibility. The next question is a security deposit on rental property needed to accommodate growth related to the services provided by the OVS grant allowable. I think I want to take that back because we do, in certain situations, security deposits are covered, but it would depend on the situation. So I think we're going to take that one back and we'll respond to that in the Q&A that are responded, that when we submit them all back to you by the 20th of February. I'm going to mute this so we can get some more questions. So the next question, what's the percentage of funding provided to already VOCA funded programs versus new proposed programs? And there is none. It's starting over. Can we confirm whether we can use grant funds for equipment systems necessary to services, playroom furniture, forensic interview equipment? Yes, but at a prorated amount depending on what the services and who the services are for. Can you confirm? I think I lost it here. Can we confirm whether we can use grant funds? No, that's one I just read. Can you confirm again whether providing forensic exams to victims of child and physical abuse is allowable? No. Will OVS be following the 80-20 rule in contract budgets? Again, we already answered that question. Let's see if we can find some more. Let's mute this line.
So this is Lindsay Sullivan, and I'm going to continue with one of the questions. In past contracts, I was told that there was a formula for minimum PTS based on number of full-time equivalency. I think it was 35 PMT units for each FTE per week. Is this still true? And how do things like increased ability to fund administrative positions or ability to fund outreach and education programs impact this? So going back to, is this still true? The answer is no. Just remember that everything has to be justified in your narrative. And I'm going to mute it again as we go on to the next question and research it. Okay, so we have a question here. I'm curious, the grant is for 3 years. Can we apply for funds that wouldn't begin until the 3rd year of the grant? And then the example they use is they move and have more services. Can we apply to increase the staffing? So I don't think you could apply for a grant that has 0 funds in year 1 and 2, but if you're looking to increase your services and you justify that in your proposal, and you're looking for additional money in years 2 and 3, yes, that is allowable. And I'll turn it over to Matt for the next one.
The next question we got in, I understand that an agency with 2 priority areas can submit in only 1 application, so it is my understanding in doing this, OVS will separate these 2 priorities and create 2 contracts, or will 2 contracts only be created if 2 separate applications are submitted? So it's the latter. We are not going to create 2 contracts from a single application. The only way to get 2 contracts would be to submit 2 separate applications. And again, that's up to every program to decide how they want to move forward and apply. So we're going to take another quick break and review some more questions.
Okay, we're back. We're going on with the next question. We are a homeless shelter that serves youth, ages 16 to 21, and they assist adults of all ages with permanent housing assistance. Do these individuals all need to complete a claim with OVS to be eligible for services funded by the grant? The answer would be no, but they would be encouraged to. Next question, if we have the legal contract and the caseworker's contract, can we still apply here for more additional direct services? The answer would be yes. Question about, we state that minor building modifications are allowable, for example, to allow for access for those with mobility issues. Can we define minor modifications? And for example, would that apply to walls put up in an office to allow for private or confidential modifications? It only applies to modifications for the ADA, Americans with Disability Act. And in this case, I would say that the answer would be no, putting walls up for a private confidential conversation area, that would not be allowed underneath, the ADA. Another question would be, if we are a subcontractor under the Attorney Services Grant, are we precluded from applying for additional OVS funding to cover areas of legal services that are not already captured through the subgrant? They state they were not a current OVS recipient for the first round of funds for attorney services. The answer is they're not prohibited. They're not precluded. They certainly can. Next question wants to know if there are limitations or requirements for permanent housing assistance or rental assistance. The answer is no. As far as we know, there are none, as far as we're concerned. Let's put it on hold a second and get some more questions. So the next question is, will the information that gets input by applicants into the attachment C1 Excel spreadsheet also need to be input elsewhere by applicants directly into the gateway? And if so, can you please clarify where within the gateway the information would need to be input, and how these projections in that spot on the gateway might differ in nuance, if at all, from what gets put in the Excel sheet. They don't get put into the gateway. The grants gateway only allows for year one budget to be input into the gateway, which is why the Excel spreadsheet is required for years 2 and 3 budgets. So the answer is no, they don't need to go into the gateway. The next question, we have one more question we hope you can answer. They work with secondary victims out of state for the purpose of helping them to assist New York State residing elder abuse victims. So they're helping them to make reports to APS about the New York State residing elder abuse victim. Would that be a fundable service under the RFA? And we believe, yes, that would be a fundable service under the RFA. We're going to take one more question, then we're going to close it out. Let's see. If an applicant received funding under the Attorney Services RFA, can they apply to receive funding for paralegals, or can they apply to serve underserved populations? And what do you consider a significant justification? I mean, I think it's very difficult to say what we consider a considerable justification. If funding was given, to an organization under that attorney RFA, they just cannot. The program cannot come back and seek additional funding to supplant anything with that contract. It is totally separate. If there are more specifics to that, I would ask that they submit that, submit a question that we could answer more direct, but it doesn't give us enough information right now to answer that. The final question we had was about the narrative does not necessarily exceed the 50,000 character limit, but they prefer to upload a PDF as an attachment so they can retain tools of formatting or emphasis, such as occasional use of italics for clarity. Are we allowed to opt for uploading the narrative to help create the easiest comprehensive experience? Yes. As I said before, if you choose not to, you would have to say see attached, and we could start, that would be evaluated underneath that without having the actual project summary. So, in conclusion, please remember that anything we did not get to today was not that we didn't want to, it was that we wanted to take it offline to get another answer. We wanted to do some more research to get the right information to you. Every question that was submitted, whether it was submitted prior to today, whether it came in today through the chat, will have a response. These responses, as stated in the RFA, are due by the 20th of February from OVS back to you. They will be posted on our website. All programs have until February 7th to get any additional questions in, and I would suggest that anyone who did not get a complete answer today to any of our responses, or if there was something that we said to you we needed a little more specificity on, please, go ahead and submit that question to us in writing. We will respond to it all. The additional questions, they should be submitted to ovs.ny.gov. And please don't forget that deadline of February 7th. If some questions come in on the 8th, we can't answer them. We are, beholden to that date. And again, we will be getting, all the responses back to you no later than February 20th. So I'd just like to say thanks for everyone for attending today. Hopefully we have answered, the vast majority of your questions. And again, if not, make sure you get them into us by the 7th so we can respond to them. And we look forward to getting all your applications submitted, in the Grants Gateway, fully pre-qualified and submitted no later than the application due date of April 3rd. So, again, thank you very much and have a good day. Again,